One of the areas that's become a focus of attention recently is Pakistani proliferation. This has been obviously an issue for some time, dating back many years. As President Carter's national security advisor, you suggested that perhaps U.S. Concerns about proliferation at that time might need to be put aside in order to win Pakistani cooperation. Do you ever feel now that perhaps there would have been an opportunity to say more on that subject at the time?
Oh, there's always an opportunity to say more. And the question is to judge how effective saying it would be. And that depends very much on the specific circumstances.
What might you have said in retrospect that you didn't say at the time?
I can't give you an instant answer. It would really depend on the specific circumstances. And these circumstances very often change from day to day.
Do you believe that the United States, in not confronting concerns about proliferation, Pakistani proliferation and development of nuclear weapons at the time, missed an opportunity to head off some of the problems that we see in that regard today?
You used the word confronting. What does that mean? Confronting is a very good word that sounds very impressive, but in effect, what is the substance of a confrontation? Do you make a threat? Do you launch an attack? And do you ostracize the government? What costs do you pay for some of these actions? And then you have to take into account also the regional context. There was also the question of the Indian nuclear program. You can't disregard that. That in turn, of course, involves the issue of China. So it's very easy to speak specifically about confrontation with a single country. But until you define it, and until you put it specifically in its historical context, that is, the date and the events surrounding that date, you can't really answer a question like that.
Well, throughout the 1980s, when the United States was looking to Pakistan as an ally in funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, do you believe that there were opportunities there perhaps to put additional pressure on the Pakistanis to rein in their nuclear program?
Throughout the 1980s, I wasn't really in charge of the National Security Council. You're speaking of the Reagan administration. I think the Reagan administration felt that the conflict in Afghanistan was of importance and that it was necessary to support the resistance and to help the Pakistanis sustain that resistance. And perhaps there wasn't even adequate intelligence on the subject. It's very hard for me to judge right offhand how accurate and how detailed the intelligence was. We now, for example, know that the information we have had regarding the North Korean nuclear programs was sporadic and basically still not adequate. Even more painfully, we know that some of our assumptions regarding the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction or their programs were, in fact, altogether wrong. So, again, you have to ask what was specifically known at that particular moment, what kind of information we had at that given moment regarding that subject, and then you can make a legitimate judgment whether more could have been done, and specifically, if so, what could have been done.
Well, in the case of your recommendations to President Carter, for example, you knew quite specifically that the Pakistanis were developing a nuclear weapons program, that they were moving ahead with that, and I believe your suggestion at the time was that perhaps setting aside concerns about that would serve a greater interest in terms of winning Pakistani cooperation. Do you believe that that was an appropriate policy as followed not only by President Carter but then?
I would say in general, yes, especially since one would have to ask oneself, what is it specifically that we could have done and how would it affect our other interests? And as I said earlier, you would also have to make a judgment, what would be the impact of any such actions on the Indian programs? Because you can't pick out a country in isolation and then try to attack that problem as if it was not connected with a lot of other international problems. We face that dilemma today, for example, in regards to Iran. We can't make that judgment entirely on the basis just of what we know as to what the Iranians are doing. We have to ask ourselves, what is the impact of that on regional stability, on the action of other countries, and only then can you make a judgment. So that is the dilemma, and that is the difficulty, in effect, in addressing an issue of this really massive complexity as if it could be extracted and isolated from its international context. Okay, that's about all we can do. Thank you very much.